So this is the second thought question topic, and I'm going to be doing it on the topic of religion. So I am personally not very religious. I identify as agnostic. At some points, I might deviate and change my mind to be more leaning toward the atheist sentiment. The only reason why is because the lack of conclusive evidence for either side, since it's impossible to prove the existence of a deity or not in our current knowledge of the universe. It's all based off assumption or belief. I believe the correct position to take would be agnostic and just say that the results are inconclusive. So one of my thoughts, major problems with being with religion, despite the whole idea of assumption that there is no way to corroborate whether or not there is some higher power or deity or not. It's all based off either circumstantial or assumptive evidence that since we cannot disprove it, it's better to believe in it, which is pretty presumptuous. And thus, we can't really take that stance from a logical perspective that to just believe in those assumptions. The main problem I have with religion is that the use of a deity is usually coupled with some form of ultimatum. It is not just that most religions use and say there is a deity. It's always there is a deity, which is the assumption, and then there's another assumption that this deity wants to be worshipped in some way or manner, and that you must worship them in that way or manner. Otherwise, you face a severe consequence of some kind. And that doesn't make too much sense to me because if your prospect of I created something, the use of there is a creator of the universe and this creator for some reason wants me to worship them, I don't see how that creator gets any use of that, how that creator somehow gets something out of that. And the reason why that most people buy into this ultimatum is that there is a severe consequence for not following through with the rules of the religion. And this causes many problems because it shows how religion uses the threat of a consequence or reward of some kind. For if you're looking at the Christian religion, you're looking at heaven and hell. At the Hindi religion, you're looking at the reincarnated as either greater being or lower being, and the caste system, some sort of like consequence for not buying into that specific dogma. And because of these consequences, it causes people to do whatever their religious leaders or religious texts do. And because of the way our brains are created, we're not very good at analyzing things we don't understand or don't have enough information for. So we're naturally going to make snap decisions in lack of evidence. It's just we're predisposed to do so. It's part of the reason why when people see someone, you're more likely to make assumptions based off their appearance and your initial impressions of them and view anything and everything they do based off those initial impressions you received in that short time frame due to your brain's necessity to make decisions about people and scenarios in a faster manner in order to create greater self-preservation. When people are initially exposed to the idea of religion, they're usually fairly young, so they're fairly impressionable. B, they're usually told that by someone that they trust or have high impressions at that time, so that easily makes whatever they tell them more credible. And three, the use of the ultimatum of not following what I say will cause grave consequence triggers in your mind that sort of self-preservation uh, protocol, and thus you immediately subscribe to whatever they say because in your mind this is an issue of life and death, even though it's really more about afterlife or life, since we are not able to properly understand death in our psychology. We don't really get death very well. Death is not something that we human beings cope naturally with. So, since we are predisposed to try to be as self-preservistic as possible, it's pretty natural that once you are introduced to the idea of religion, that you will do whatever they say without really thinking about it, and your fear of the potential consequences outweighs any lost uh, understand anything lost that they gain from you, such as tributes or time or allegiance. Those sort of things pale in comparison to the idea of eternal torment or uh, some form of not receiving some extended life, not being able to preserve yourself after your death. Now, because of this, I don't really believe that religion should be a part of public education. And the reason for that is that since all religions use this sort of ultimatum and deity for their own control, allowing religions to be a part of the public sphere creates a sense of control over a certain populace that's going to give that religion way too much power in our government. And since the way religion functions, the power it would yield would cause corruption to an absurd amount. It's been shown that most regimes that have failed, or most regimes that allow for a heavy reliance on religion as their basis, tend to easily corrode due to corruption and the overstep of bounds that religion usually takes when they are in charge of secular entities such as governments and schools. Therefore, religion should be a part of public education. It should be part from from public education, and should become part from the government. Because once you allow religion to take too much of a space in a public or the secular sphere, rather, it just corrodes the viability for that public sphere to remain cohesive, and it just causes unnecessary problems. There are pros to religion, however. I must admit, it allows people to have some sort of incentive to remain morally culpable, because this sort of ultimatum does usually make people do good things, even though I personally find that immoral to compel someone to do something under the name of a unrealistic and inhumane consequence. However, hence I feel that people should do what is morally correct based off their own will. And if someone does not do something morally correct based off their own will, you should not incentivize that person to do something morally correct by like threatening them. That doesn't seem right. Telling them that there are going to be bad consequences and allowing that person to make those good choices on their own free will is the only way I see someone to be a moral person, not I'm doing this moral thing because I am afraid of potential consequences to myself. I find is kind of pretty bad. Yeah, I think that's pretty bad. So while I do understand